So to continue talking about our trigonometric identities, we can rewrite this problem right here without the sign of pi over 2 minus x. Now, if you look back, this right here is actually the exact same as cosine. That's one of our cofunction identities. So I can rewrite this as sine squared of x cosine of x minus cosine of x. And you'll see, I noticed something that's in both of them. I see cosine in both of them. So what I can do is I can factor that out. So factor out cosine of x, and I get sine squared of x minus 1. And if you think back to the Pythagorean identity, we wanted 1 minus sine squared of x to be equal to cosine squared. So if I want to switch this around, I can always switch something around in parentheses. I just have to factor out a negative 1. It goes like this, so I take that negative out there. So really, this is equal to negative cosine of x, and it's 1 minus sine squared of x. And you'll remember that this is the same as cosine squared of x. So now I have negative cosine of x times cosine squared of x. And so if you think about it, I have 1, 2, 3 cosines, and it's negative times a positive, so it's going to be negative cosine cubed of x. This is my answer. So I went from this big thing down to cosine cubed of x. Here's a guided practice problem. You can try the same thing. First, start by finding the cofunction of negative cosecant of pi over 2 minus x. Now we can rewrite this by combining our fractions. Now you'll notice that 1 minus sine of x doesn't change into anything. It's not an identity. Cosine of x doesn't really change anything that'll help us. So what we can do is we can actually just multiply the top and bottom of this one by 1 minus sine x, and the top and bottom of this one by cosine x. That way I have a common denominator. So I'd get sine x cosine squared x all over cosine x 1 minus sine x minus, and then I'd have, well, let's see, 1 times 1 is 1. Sine x times sine x negative would be negative sine squared x. Okay, then I have to do sine x times 1, which would be plus sine x. And then I'd have to do 1 minus sine x, would be minus sine x, all over cosine x 1 minus sine x. So I can simplify a little bit. You'll see I have plus sine x minus sine x, so those go away. And so I can rewrite this whole thing as sine x cosine squared x minus, well, 1 minus sine squared x is the same as cosine squared x. And all of that is going to be over cosine x times 1 minus sine x. Okay? So I'll see in the top that I can take a cosine squared out of everything, right? There's one right here, one right here. So I'm going to rewrite it as cosine squared x times sine x minus 1 all over cosine x times 1 minus sine x. Now you might notice that right here, the top and bottom, those are super close to each other. And we said in the previous example, you can always switch the order by taking a negative out. So right there. So now I actually have negative cosine squared x times 1 minus sine x all over cosine x 1 minus sine x. And so now let's cancel as best we can. Well, we'll see that we have 1 minus sine x and 1 minus sine x in the top and bottom. I also have a cosine squared over a cosine, so one of these will go away. And so all I'm left with at the very end is negative cosine of x. There's my answer. Here's a couple guided practice problems. You can try the same now. Now you'll notice also in B here, 1 plus secant and 1 minus secant. If you multiply them by each other, those are conjugates, and so your middle terms are going to cancel out. You're going to get something that looks a little bit easier. Last one. Rewrite to eliminate this fraction. It says rewrite 1 over 1 plus cosine x as an expression that does not involve a fraction. So the first thing I want to do is kind of what I just talked about in 6b, is guided practice. If I want to get rid of this bottom or make it into something nice, I'm going to multiply by its conjugate. That way, 1 times 1 is 1. Cosine times negative cosine is negative cosine squared x. Then I have cosine times 1, which would be plus cosine x, minus cosine x. Okay? Now I look at the top. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times minus cosine is just minus cosine. Okay. So you'll see these two cancel each other out, and I get 1 minus cosine x over 1 minus cosine squared x. Now you're probably thinking, okay, I see 1 minus cosine x. We've always changed that into a different identity, which is just sine squared of x. Okay? So now I feel like maybe I'm a little stuck. Okay? Now I feel like I'm maybe a little stuck because I have 1 minus cosine of x and sine squared of x. So what I like to do if I feel like I'm stuck is I just break them apart. So see this minus sign right here? Okay? The minus sign right here means that I can break it up into two different fractions. So I'm going to rewrite it. So it's really 1 over sine squared of x minus cosine of x over sine squared of x. Okay? Well, I can see this right here. 1 over sine was always cosecant. So 1 over sine squared is just going to be cosecant squared of x. So I've got rid of that one. That's good. Now I look at the next one. Okay? Well, cosine over sine is cotangent, and then I'm left with a sine on the bottom. So if I look at this right here and say that this is equivalent to cosine of x over sine of x times 1 over sine of x. Notice I haven't changed anything. It's just cosine times 1 is cosine. Sine times sine is sine squared. This right here is going to be cotangent of x. And this right here is going to be cosecant of x. And so now I went from a fraction to no fractions any longer. You can try the same with these guided practice problems. Like I just mentioned before, the nicest thing to do is to start by multiplying by its conjugate. Something's going to fall out, and then it's easier to go from there. If you get stuck, remember that if there's a plus or minus sign in there, that actually breaks into two different fractions and can make our life a little bit easier.